We're back, everybody. It is time for the latest episode of Decoding Dune, where we've been reading through the Dune Trilogy by Frank Herbert to coincide with the new film series that's being shot and filmed. We've seen the first film a couple of times. We're actually sort of simultaneously. I was for a little bit anyway. It's been a bit, but I've still have the film here so that as I get through and see new scenes, I can dive into it. Um, and then, of course, the second film is coming out. Now they've moved it out to like April or something of next year, which gives us more time to finish the first novel. But we're also going to be reading through Children of Dune and the Dune Messiah. So we're going through the original trilogy. There's a lot more books than beyond that. There's also the Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert books, which I've read some of. They're not too bad. They're definitely more. Well, that's another thing. I don't want to get sidetracked. We do this every week. If you haven't watched the previous episodes, check the playlist below to watch the previous chapters. We do one chapter every single week and sort of discuss and analyze as I read through it here. They're pretty short chapters as a general rule, so I've been able to do it in this format. Whereas other things like the Silmarillion, I'm getting ready to split up because it's just too much to do in these individual episodes. But that show airs on Monday. In the meantime, let's get into this. I think we're chapter, let me double check here. I should have checked this before I started, but I think we're up to chapter 14, Decoding Dune. This is 15, chapter 15 today. So without further ado, chapter 15 of the first Dune novel by Frank Herbert. We, of course, start off with a segment by Princess Irulan from the book In My Father's House. And in this, she's talking about her father, the emperor, the Padishah emperor, who one day apparently took her by the hand, and she got the distinct impression that he was disturbed with the things that my mother had taught me. He then took her down the Hall of Portraits in the palace to essentially a it says ego likeness. I'm assuming that's like a hologram of Duke Leto Atreides. And the princess is remembering back to how she saw a similarity in the Duke and her father based on this portrait, with thin, elegant faces and sharp features dominated by cold eyes. That is a very interesting, very interesting way to think about things, especially when you get the sense that was it last chapter or the chapter before? Leto was having this internal dialogue and then talking to Paul as well about the need to be the aloof leader with no emotional attachments to be able to do the good of your people, whatever it takes. Talking about his own propaganda machines and how they have to keep the propaganda running to get people on their side so that they don't fall to the Harkonnen side or the Empire's side. Like, it's a cruel thing to be in the Landstrat in this series, for sure. And then, of course, the Empress says to her, I wish that you'd been older when it came time for this man to choose a woman. Huh. And so he would have perhaps wanted his daughter wed to the Duke. My father was 71 at the time, looking no older than the man in the portrait, and I was only 14. But she says, I remember in that instant just knowing that my father secretly wished the Duke had been his son and disliked the political necessities that made them enemies. I don't remember this at all, everybody. Like, especially the way he is always portrayed in the films. So far, we haven't actually seen Denis' take on this because that film isn't coming out till next year. And we're getting a new version of the Emperor. So I wonder if this Emperor is going to show that remorse in the film. Because in the David Lynch film and in the Sci-Fi Channel series, the Emperor is never shown as being a remorseful person. He's just shown as being cutthroat and cruel. And yet here we're getting this distinct impression from the princess that what her father did to the Duke was out of sheer necessity. Like, it's just part of survival. Like, there's a phrase here in Mexico they use, si no tranzas, no avanzas. If you don't cheat, you don't win. And it's essentially the idea that everyone else around you, is going to, fight tooth and nail to get to the top. And they're not going to care about who they pull down along the way. And you either have to accept that and be okay with being someone that someone else is going to step on, or you be one of the ones doing the stepping on. It's not, that's life, man. That's life. In every country in the world, there is no utopia that exists yet where money doesn't matter and people don't stab their brothers in the back, stab their best friends in the back. You know, there are so many examples of this in every country in the world. The moment money becomes a thing, and power, and if you want to keep the money and keep the power, you have to be willing to do the things that no one else is willing to do, which is the cold, cutthroated stuff, the cold eyes that they explain here. Man, I feel like just the introduction to this chapter is enough to make a whole episode out of. Um, we're getting the perspective of Dr. Kynes now in the chapter. It said his first encounter with the people he had been ordered to betray left Dr. Kynes shaken. He said he tried to keep himself on being a scientist rooted in fact. Um, he said legends are merely interesting clues pointing towards cultural roots, yet the boy fitted the ancient prophecy precisely in a way that is making this scientist question everything he knows about science and fact and method and methodology. And he's questioning himself right now because he's been here, he's part of the Fremen. Um, that's potent. But we get here the discussion about how the prophecy never specified, however, whether the mother goddess would bring the Messiah with her or produce him on the planet. So, still questions up in the air. There's still not enough to even satisfy the most rigid of minds. Like, there's doubt being caused, but it's not enough. I need something factual. I don't remember ever being shown the Doctor's perspective in any of the previous films or miniseries. Huh. Huh. More potency here because this is the scene where the Doctor sees uh, the Duke and Paul coming out of the building towards him, dressed in still suits. But just essentially to cut through it here, we've seen this scene portrayed in all of the various versions we've seen on camera. It's the Doctor stepping up to the Duke and Paul and checking to see how their still suits have been fitted. And the Duke's, of course, needs some adjustments, whereas Paul's, on the other hand, is perfect. And um, the phrase here that Kynes thinks to himself is, "The Maudit will be aware of things others cannot see." And here comes Gurney Halleck, who apparently had previously had an encounter with Kynes and basically told him how he needed to behave in front of the Duke in the air. Ooh. So apparently Kynes is a little upset right now because not on top of all of this, they had him questioned for half the night by the Mentat that they have in their employ. And he's like, and now they expect me to help guide them on an inspection of spice mining? Yeah, get bent. Kynes also thinks to himself, this obviously the information they have about going to inspect the spice mining operations because they want the Imperial bases. That's obviously info that they got from Duncan Idaho, who we know has been with the Fremen. And Kynes thinks to himself, I'm going to have Stigwell send Idaho's head to this Duke. So Kynes is quite upset right now and feeling very, very violated by the Atreides, which is it just goes to show you that even though they have the best of intentions, it doesn't matter. Like, good and evil is very gray, and everybody has a perspective of their own on things. Ooh, and now we switched point of view. As Leto is looking at Dr. Kynes, planetologist. Also the judge of change, arbiter of dispute, the man set here to see that the forms are obeyed in our assumption of power over this fief, says the Duke to Paul. So he's in Imperial employment, officially. The Imperial Planetologist. but who is accepted in both siege and village because he is Fremen. This is this is really cool. So they're having a conversation. Gurney's upset because Kynes isn't giving deference to the Duke. He's being very cold and frigid and just telling him facts. And Leto is being polite, and he tells Dr. Kynes, "We are indebted to you for your consideration of our welfare and the suits." And it says, on impulse, Paul was reminded of a quote from the OC Bible, which says, "The gift is the blessing of the giver." And it says the words. I love the description here. The words rang out over loud in the still air, and the Fremen escort leapt from their squatting repose, muttering in open agitation, and one cried out, "Lisan al-Gaib!" Meanwhile, Kynes turns swiftly, giving a curt, chopping signal with a hand, and waves the guard away. Calm yourselves, essentially. Shut up! Stop that superstitious nonsense in front of this. And Leto notices all of this. Interesting. But again, Kynes is thinking back to the words of the legend. They will greet you with holy words, and your gifts will be a blessing. So again, his scientific mind. I'm getting a little excited here. But his scientific mind is the wheels are spinning. He's like, damn it, there's stuff here that I can't explain scientifically. So I spoke earlier and said Kynes was Fremen, but there is a distinction to be made because he's an imperial employee, but he essentially Paul notices here. There's a phrase that he says he notices now that Kynes he's finally making his assessment. He says he came with a Fremen escort, which to some could mean that the Fremen were simply testing their newfound freedom to enter urban areas, but it had seemed like an honor guard. But by his manner, he was a proud man accustomed to freedom, with his tongue and manner guarded only by his own suspicions. And he realizes in an instant that, oh, the Doctor's gone native. Like, he is Fremen, but he's not Fremen-born, but he is accepted by the Fremen because he's a part of them. He's become a brother. It's a great description of the still suits that follows. I'm reading through it right now, and this is one of the areas where I think it's obviously artists can take some artistic freedom with the way they are visually portrayed, but mechanically speaking, they are extremely. We get an extremely detailed description here of what still suits are and how they work, which is really cool. This is the point where Kynes is examining Paul's still suit and he's questioning, did you put it on by yourself? Is this the first time? Someone adjusted it for you, etc., etc. And at the end, he thinks to himself, he shall know your ways as though born to them. So, right? Again, it's like hammering at the back of his mind the prophecy. There's a great description here as they're on the ornithopter heading out to the spice field where Kynes is sitting back thinking about everything he's seen up to this point. The fact that the royal family all have shield belts over their robes, pellet stunners at the waist, coin-sized emergency transmitters on cords around their neck. Both the Duke and his son carrying knives in wrist sheaths, and the sheaths appeared well worn. He says these people struck him as a combination of softness and armed strength, a poise to them totally unlike the Harkonnen. It's a really good explanation because they have been living on the edge, like constantly on defense, and they know that they could be attacked here as well. Leto is also he's questioning Kynes here about the fact that you're going to report to the Emperor on the change of government here. Are you going to tell them that we observe the rules and that everything is as it should be? And of course, Kynes is like, I am judge of the change. I'm a direct subject of the Imperium, my lord. And the Duke smiles grimly but says, but we both know the realities. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. This is a very interesting interrogation, essentially, where the Duke is specifically asking Kynes, do you also investigate spice? And there's this back and forth about how I don't care what you do as long as you share those things with me. I realize the Harkonnens discouraged investigation of the spice. And the Duke says, you can speak plainly with me without fear for your skin. And Kynes' response is that the Imperial Court is indeed Very full, very well. Learn how to talk. The Imperial Court is indeed a long way off. And he thinks to himself, does he expect me to enlist with him? Does he think I'm an idiot? Like, come on now. Ah, this is amazing. So they're referring to the propaganda that the Duke has been spreading around. And so, from the perspective of Kynes, this guy's no different than the Harkonnen. He's doing the exact same thing. He's landing, putting troops everywhere, sending out propaganda, taking control of the spice, taking control of the natural resources of the planet. From the from the perspective of the Fremen, the Atreides are no different. And the Duke realizes this at the same time and says, "I detect a sour note in your voice because we've waited in here with our troops and everything else, and we expect you to realize immediately that we're different from the Harkonnens. I get why you're suspicious. I totally get it." Quick commercial break, everyone, to give a shout out to our first official guild officer, Babylonia, as well as all of the guild champions, and of course, all of the members who help keep me on the air full time. To join as a member, simply click that join button below and pick your tier, but you can also support with super chats on any live stream or premiere, or super thanks on any upload or YouTube short. Don't forget the Discord. Let's get back to the video. Ooh, there's a back and forth debate here about the future of Arrakis as the Duke tries to convince the Doctor to open up the spice factories to him because they're not being used. And there's this discussion about how it could become a paradise. And the Duke's like, "Yeah, but could it become a paradise without money? I'm here with the money, and I can help you make it a paradise, perhaps." But because Kynes is like, Arrakis could be an Eden if the rulers would look up him grubbing from spice. Um, but Kynes fires back and says, "What is money if it won't buy the services you need?" Ooh, we can't be bought. Your money means nothing here because the Fremen can't be bought. There's a scene here with Gurney Halleck singing a ballad in the middle of the Ornithopter, which I don't know that I've ever seen this portrayed in any of the adaptations, and I can understand why. It's not a necessary scene that progresses the story. It's just like a filler. It would be a filler from a visual perspective. But Curran also looks back at Gurney and says, "Are all of your men of such talent? Because you travel with so few. Surely they must all be specialized warriors who could also play the balisette." Like, so there's another really good. This is, by the way, this is turning into one of the longer chapters. I was saying earlier how most of the chapters are short. This is not a short chapter. They're talking about the men on the spice who are working out on the spice. There's a back and forth here about worms. What are sandworms? Can they be taken out? Can they be destroyed? Can we keep the workers safe? And there's this section about the Duke wanting to know about, I'd like to put transmitters in all my men and give them, an emergency way out. And kind of snorts derisively, and the Duke's like, "You don't agree?" And he's like, "Of course I agree, but the problem is we've tried it before. It's been done. There's static transmissions, sandstorms. It's not going to work. If the worm's actually here, there's no time. You got 15 minutes, 20 tops to get out." So the Duke says, "What would you advise?" And he fires back and says, "You ask my advice?" And he says, "As a planetologist, yes." And he says, "You'd follow my advice." And the Duke says, "If I found it sensible." Um, and so Kynes responds, "Never travel alone." Very, very, very important. Never travel alone. All right, we're getting to the scene about them coming up on the. By the way, this is brilliantly done in the new film. I think it's been done pretty well in everything I've ever seen, every adaptation. The first arrival by Ornithopter to check the spice fields and check one of the spice machines in action with the worm sign over the horizon coming in. Yeah, and here's the section where the Duke sees something off on the horizon, turns the Ornithopter around. Is that worm sign? It is indeed worm sign. Oof. This is so this is it's propaganda, but it's very well done. So there's this scene here where the guys are on the radio like, "Thanks for the advice about the worm sign. Who do we give credit to?" And Kynes said there's a bonus based on spice load for whoever gives the first worm warning. So they're asking, and so the Duke says, tell them who it was, but then tell them to divide the bonus amongst themselves. That it's the Duke's desire. Um, and the Duke says, because this was Gurney Halleck's suggestion, he's like, I forgot to mention Dr. Kynes. Gurney's also very talented at public relations. But this whole scene is to let the men know that the Duke cares about their safety more than anything else, not necessarily spice production. This has been a really good chapter, everybody. It's making me I'm getting a little teary-eyed reading it. It's pretty good. Like I like it when I can get emotionally impacted by a chapter just from, it doesn't always have to be like sadness. Like this is just a really cool feeling of just, especially because I just watched the film with Chris again, and this is very fresh in my mind, this whole sequence. So this is the turning point when Kynes realizes that Leto is actually different, when he says, damn the spice. We're going to rescue these workers no matter what. We can always get more spice. Draw straws, decide who's going to go, but we're going to get as many men out as we can. And this is the section when toss out the rear seats. Oh, and the Duke says also toss out your shield freak generators. We're not leaving any men for the monster. Oof. There's this sequence as they're flying. The ornithopter is very heavy, but the Duke is a good pilot. Kynes notices this in his calm, sure manner at guiding the ship, and they do this long, bankable curve around the silent machine on the sand. It says here over the crawler, and Kynes says the worm is now beneath it. You are about to witness a thing few have ever seen. The gigantic sand whirlpool beginning right in the middle of the crawler, moving faster and faster, and here it came. Oh. Bless the Maker in his water. Bless the coming and going of him. May his passage cleanse the world. May he keep the world for his people. All right, so there's another thing here that I don't remember having seen in any of the film or TV portrayals, and as they're pulling away, Paul notices that there were some men there was a couple of men who were moving north away from the sand depression after the worm had withdrawn. And he realizes as he's looking down at these two figures moving across the stand, moving in a way obviously calculated to keep them from luring the worm back out of its death, that he thinks to himself, Fremen, who else would be so sure of the sands? They know how to live here. They know how to outwit the worms. And he just blurts this question out. What were the Fremen doing on the crawler? And Kynes whirls around. And some of the workers are like, what do you mean Fremen on our crawler? What are you talking about? And Kynes remembers to himself, the Lisan al-Gaib shall see through all subterfuge. The end of this chapter is basically Liet or Dr. Kynes thinking to himself. By the way, there's a section here towards the end where one of the guys mutters his name, Liet, and he just turns around and glares at the guy, and that's the only mention of it. But Dr. Kynes essentially ends the chapter looking at the Duke, making his assessment and going, this guy was willing to risk his own life and that of his son to save these men. He passed off the loss of a spice crawler with a gesture. The threat to his men was what had him in a rage. This leader is a man who could command. This is a leader who could command fanatic loyalty and who would be difficult to defeat. Against his own will and all previous judgment, he had to admit to himself, I like this Duke. That's been my favorite chapter so far, everybody. I got pretty emotional a few times during that. I like when books move me to feel excited. Great chapter. That's definitely been my most favorite chapter of the book so far. There's like half that chapter I just don't remember, and I've never seen any of the film adaptations. So it's just a great deep dive into the world of Dune and the cultures and the people and the characters. So great character building, great world building here. I'm so invested. Hopefully see you next week for the next episode. Like, subscribe, hit that bell icon, everybody. See you then.